Now we're going to turn to Google Classroom. So Google Classroom for administrators specifically. I've definitely used Google Classroom as a teacher, of course. This is where I'm housing content for my students. But I found Google Classroom to be pretty useful as an administrator. One of the things in my previous role that I've noticed a kind of gap is employee onboarding, particularly instructor onboarding. The gap really was more like just having a place where we can house documents, house policies, house any kind of training that when someone is first hired, right? And just using that Google Classroom as the platform and as the reminder, because you can set an assignment, like say it's like read the policy and sign it by blank date, right? When you're hiring somebody. If you have that in Google Classroom, they will get reminders. And you will get, as an instructor, you will get the notification that they completed or they marked that they completed an assignment. This could be really beneficial for administrators because it's so, as admin, we are overloaded and sometimes it's really hard to keep track of things, and using different tools are great ways to just keep track of that stuff. So I use Google Classroom Instructor Onboarding. I created a volunteer tutor training in Google Classroom. And that's kind of similar. There was a link to the volunteer handbook that I created when I built the volunteer program, inviting the volunteers to, at their own pace, to finish certain trainings, to also have access to resources they can always go back to. It was beneficial in that way. And, you know, just anecdotally, like, we definitely had more volunteers that stuck to it. There was a learning curve, especially because volunteers generally tend to be older people. So there's that technology curve that can be an issue. But what I observed is that the volunteers that got the support from me to continue and continued it, they stuck with the program longer.
Yes.
Than the volunteers that got just like a meeting kind of onboarding. That wasn't just that. Their kind of training was more of an introductory session. That was like an orientation, right?
Yes.
Online.
Yes. And you know, coming from the point of view of an administrator, when you have volunteers, you know, and a lot of our programs do, it really is essential to make sure that the volunteers are trained to the best of your capacity. And for a very long time, you know, our program just didn't have that capacity to provide an effective training. So when Nadia created this Google Classroom training for the volunteers, yes, it took time. You know, I worked with you, Nadia, on the planning and the design of it. It took a lot of time. It took, 6 months to plan and create that classroom. But once that was done, you know, that really paid off. And yes, there's still continuous work in monitoring the assignments, making sure everything gets turned in, commenting on, especially if the assignment required a response and then you comment on that response. There is that ongoing tracking and support for the participants. And that's something very important to remember too, is you create it and you send it out, but you're still not done. You're still doing those other things. I think that that's important to note. But overall, the amount of effort that we had to put in compared to the return, I think was much less. You know, we got a huge return out of that.
Yeah, just having those expectations of you have to go through this training. And we estimated how long it would take. It took like 12 hours, which could be a lot for volunteers, especially if people weren't sure or didn't totally realize the extent of what it would mean to be a volunteer, right? And maybe aren't as committed as they thought originally. So it culled the herd. But the ones that stayed really stuck with it. And a few of them were even hired by the program after some time because they were dedicated and they were working towards, and you know, the funding came through. So there really was, in that sense, and I do think that was a part of it. They had to learn this stuff and they had to put that effort in at the beginning, and that paid off, and that kind of kept them really committed. And there was just some really great volunteers that came through with that program. Really great people, really great people that honestly, it's more like the training didn't make them great people. They were already great people, but they were looking for an opportunity, and having a volunteer program gave them that opportunity, you know?
Yes.
So I'm just grateful at that time, you know, that those people came through for the program. And now I don't work for that program anymore, but now I know that the adult ed field is a little richer in New Mexico for having those volunteers. And I think so many programs can really benefit from having volunteers.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we already know that the literacy programs use volunteers regularly. Volunteers are an important part of adult ed, and they don't always get that recognition. They really do put the work in for free.
Yes, they do.
Absolutely. All right. So another thing about Google Classroom, as a professional learning coordinator, my job is professional learning, or, you know, what was known as professional development. Professional learning is so important. And that goes for volunteers, that goes for instructors, that goes for admin, directors, data people, finance people, student support specialists, or student advisors, career advisors, navigators. There's so many different terms and jobs that vary, or maybe even only in title, or just very different duties, right? Like there's so many people in adult ed.
Yes.
And in different ways, they need professional learning to continue to give the best of what they do. And the reason why I'm prefacing all this is one project that actually didn't work out, and I used Google Classroom for. So one of the things I identified in my previous role was that professional learning component, and realizing that just going to conferences and teachers' institutes weren't always enough. There's different kinds of learning that can be done over a period of time that aren't just going to an hour or 2 hour or 3 hour session once in the school year. Also, there's a lot of internal stuff that needs to be learned, and that's going to look different for every program. So like,
Yes.
think of it, internal professional development, or, you know, a part of that onboarding is going to look completely different from program to program. You know, there might be some similar components, of course, you know, like teaching or maybe lesson planning or understanding certain policies, but every program has different needs. So their programs are going to have different professional learning. So one thing I tried to do in my previous role was to have a set standard of professional learning. I knew that the field was going in this different direction because we've heard talk, we've been in meetings. It's been around that professional learning is going to be a requirement. That doesn't mean a bad thing. We are professional people, whether you're a professional admin or whatever.
This is a professional field, yes.
Mm-hmm. This is a professional field. You need that continuing ed in that sense, that continuing education, that continuing professional learning. So I created a Google Classroom professional development kind of classroom, with the idea being that every teacher, new and current, would have a same foundation of knowledge, because what I've observed is that because this is adult ed, everyone came with such varying education and experience and background, and there wasn't a base foundation for learning. So that's kind of like my idea, was to create this professional development classroom, and it didn't go well. It went poorly.
It did. Yeah.
And a few things that went wrong with this kind of stuff. And I think as administrators who may or may not be managing or coordinating, supporting others, there has to be this understanding that just because something is shiny and new and it looks great and other people have success in it, that doesn't necessarily mean that you and your program are going to have success with it.
Right.
Right. So what it comes down to was that it was not a team effort. It was a Nadia thinks that people need to know this stuff, and we're going to have to go this route. So there was a lot of pushback, and the teachers were not happy.
Well, and I think in addition, you know, as the program director, it was also my job to better communicate, why are we doing this? What is the benefit for this? And I think that's part of the lesson learned for me, is that getting the buy-in from your staff is essential, and communication is essential to that. So making sure that they understand, why are we doing this? What is the benefit to me? And more to your point, Nadia, again, can we make this a collective effort? Can we do this together? Can we get input? And sometimes the answer is no. Sometimes the answer is no, we can't. And every institution is different. But if it's possible, that can definitely increase the buy-in and the understanding of the purpose.
Yes, I agree. I also think that there really is buy-in isn't necessarily just I'm agreeing with what you're saying. It really is I'm a part of building my own experience and knowledge. And I think that's where we have to go. That is where we're going as a field, or we're trying to, at least. We're trying to get to where people do their professional learning. They plan what they want to learn.
They customize it for themselves.
They
right?
customize it for themselves. And that really should have been the effort in that sense, in that internal PD kind of thing that I was trying. But like I said, the onboarding was robust. Mm-hmm. And I think it was way simpler. And the hires that we had at that time, because, there's some shifting, but everyone had a slightly different onboarding before, just depending on the day, depending on who was doing it. But having like that structure in Google Classroom and then having people go through it, the difference was night and day of like what the base understanding was of the expectations of the role and where the policies are housed and what you have to do before you even get to that classroom, what you're supposed to know. Yeah, so I still think that Google Classroom, back to the tech tools thing, is really is like it wasn't the tech that was the problem, it was the planning that was the problem, and the design. That should have been a team effort. So yeah.
No, yeah, definitely Google Classroom just as a tool is very effective for professional learning. And I definitely recommend using that for internal PD.
Yeah, just plan it better.
Right? Get more input.
Okay. And finally, wow, we still have one more to talk about.
Yes, we do.
Oh my goodness. And that is ClickUp, project management software. So project management, which is exactly as it sounds, just to put it simply, it's more complicated than that, but just managing multiple projects as a professional learning coordinator. I feel like I said that a lot this episode, but in my role, I am managing a bunch of projects at once, and they're all in various stages of completion. So what has been really helpful was project management software. I found a free project management software that's web-based application called ClickUp. ClickUp has also paid versions, but I have not explored that. I'm not talking about that. Didn't do the upgrade, wasn't quite interested yet. But with ClickUp, it can get a little complicated. It can get a little scary. They also have their own docs tool where it's housed in a place where everyone can access. They're doing a bunch of like really out there stuff, and it's kind of like Canva. There's just so much functionality. It can get a little dizzying. So I try to stick to my basics. So right now I have my ClickUp open and I'm looking at it and seeing what exactly is on my dashboard. And I have multiple spaces. A while back, the Delt team, when we were restructuring and trying to figure out what we want to do, we decided to do a needs assessment. So a needs assessment is exactly in its name, is figuring out what the need is, what are people asking for, what are the gaps in knowledge or skills, and how the Delt team can approach that. So we used ClickUp to keep track. We contacted every program in the state of New Mexico.
Yeah, it was the adult education and the literacy programs. So there were 39, I want to say.
Yes, 39. We had responses from 32. So 7 people we could not get, 7 programs we just, for whatever reason, the communication, we just could not schedule time. So what the Delt team did is we used Google tools for this too. In addition to ClickUp, we created a survey form. Instead of giving it to the programs, what we did was we set up 15 to 30-minute interviews. We sent each program using Gmail, because that's what we use. We sent them questions ahead of time. We scheduled using Google Calendar, right?
Yes.
And then, so we would fill out the survey while talking to people. So like they were we were asking questions, they were giving us the answers, and then the Delt team member, we split it up between 3 of us, and we would just answer the surveys and then submit them, right? So that
was in a Google form.
that was in a Google form. Yeah. And then every time we finished an interview, we created cards. So ClickUp has so many different views. Like it's kind of like a souped up Trello. So one version is the list view. Another is the board, which was set up like a Trello board. So we created all these cards in different sections: to contact, or to do, contacted, completed, and we would physically move every card like with our mouse to the completed, to the done section. And so that we had this like just view, and we could see how many we completed and what was done and the time frame. Do you remember roughly how long that time frame was, like between the 3 of us interviewing the 32 programs that communicated with us?
I want to say the time frame was around 3 months.
Yeah, so this took a little bit of time.
Yeah.
But the goal is really just listening to people. What are they saying? What tech tools do they need? What skill gaps are they noticing? Just so that we, as the professional learner coordinators, the Delt team members, could change our approach so that we could better fit in with what the field needs. Because at the time, the webinars and the workshops, both online, we're not getting the attention that we wanted. And it turns out there was a reason for that.
Yes.
And through this needs assessment, which, by the way, needs assessment can be used in any space. Like think of community need, think of student need. You could do a needs assessment, asking people, set up these questions, ask people, what do you need? What is working for you? What isn't? What would you like to see? And what we found is that these webinars, these workshops, they were on specific times, but almost every single program gave us different time frames of what they have available. And it was like, how do you plan for that? How on earth do you plan for 32 different slots for a webinar? And you know what? Quick answer, you can't.
That is the answer. Yes.
It's also like the timing. Do you have an hour? Do you have 2 hours? A lot of programs said, no, we don't.
Right.
Or the admin will have different times available and different amount of time available than the instructors.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And it's like, oh my goodness. So the synchronous stuff wasn't working at that time. So that's why we switched gears. We switched gears to the Tech Tuesdays, which is asynchronous video on YouTube. So, which is another tool we did not talk about, but we use. If you guys get when you guys get Jamie's emails about the podcast, this podcast, when you get her emails about the Tech Tuesdays, that is YouTube, right?
Yes.
And that we've actually gotten more engagement than I've seen since starting with Propel through these asynchronous content, right? And a big part of that was having the organization in ClickUp so that we could keep track of who we contacted and where. And also the physical movement of clicking on a card, holding it, and moving it to another. There's this kind of satisfactory, I don't know if you felt that way, Jamie, but I felt like great satisfaction. Like, okay, one's done. We got 3 more this week, and just kept going.
Oh yeah, definitely. And to be able to see the whole team, like what is our status? What is our percent completion? How, do we need to extend our deadline? Are we going to meet our deadline? Nadia, to your point, we interviewed 32 out of 39. And I did the math. That is an 82% response rate. That's almost unheard of. And I do attribute some of that to just the organization in that project management software. It kept us on task. It kept us moving forward. And And it also created opportunities for us to help each other out. If we noticed that there were certain programs that we just couldn't reach, we helped each other out. We kind of tackled it from more than one angle. And so that, was again part of just being able to see that at a glance in ClickUp. I really do think that ClickUp is a very effective tool, and it has an app. In fact, I believe all of these tools that we were just talking about have an app. Canva has an app. Jotform has an app. And I can't tell you how much I love apps, but I do, because there have been times where I've had to update something really quickly on a Jotform, and I am not home and I'm not at my computer, but I have my phone and the app can do it easily. So with ClickUp, it's the same thing. You can do those moving the cards or marking things as done or making notes in the app, and it is very easy. And for those of us that need time-saving opportunities, you take those where you can.
Oh, absolutely. And just looking at my ClickUp, because sometimes our projects are more like, hosting an event or something. So it doesn't totally lend itself to a project management tool. For example, one of the back burner projects I have is updating our websites, because some of the websites, we have different websites depending on the team, and the Propel main site. And just having that there, what do we have to do in it? Is it in the process of being updated? Does it need review? Is it complete? And I've been working on that using ClickUp. I also have my courses on here. So the courses I'm creating, they also have different phases, and each space can have different titled kind of folders, so that maybe to do or updating or complete will work for the website portion, but won't work for the course necessarily, because the courses have more stuff than just updating, right? It's like creating this content, or I use instructional design kind of terminology. So I was like, okay, which stage am I at in this course creation if I'm using an ADDIE model, ADDIE, which is analysis, design, development, implementation, evaluation. I think I got that right. Did I get that right?
I believe you did. Yeah, I think you're right.
Wow. Yes. Yes. So what phase and course I'm at, right? When I'm creating courses. And instructional design is not just for professional learners. Like maybe your program is creating an onboarding course, right? Or maybe you're working on a digital literacy course or something, or some kind of
program could be creating a presentation for a conference, where you're highlighting a particular program you're doing, and you have to get that presentation ready. You can also use ClickUp for that.
Thank you. Yeah, absolutely. So like, where are you and what stage? Who needs to do what? You can also have teams. So I have Rebecca and Jamie and Tina on my teams, so that if there's projects that I'm working, not just me, but with multiple people, I can assign people specific tasks. And then when they finish it, right, they can mark it off. They can move it to the next stage and I'll get a notification. You could put in due dates. You could put in priority. What's the priority compared to, and that's something really important, especially with administrators that have so many different kinds of projects to do. Is there a data audit? Is there an orientation to redesign? There's so many different things that admin do, right?
And to that point, I think I can speak for a lot of people, definitely for myself, when I say that as an administrator, you have all of these different tasks and projects that you're managing simultaneously. And sometimes you can feel like, well, nothing is getting done. Everything's in process. And the great thing about this project management software, at least for me, is being able to visually see that progress in every project that I'm looking at. I can visually see that it's moving toward that finish line, and you can see what maybe isn't moving, but it really does keep all of those things in one place at a glance and organized for you. And that gives me so much peace of mind.
Absolutely. Sometimes it's really hard to just really figure out how to be organized, Like, and organization in itself is so time consuming. And sometimes it's better to just, or it feels like it's better to just do something. But when you have that little wiggle room, if you put the time and energy into the organization first, in the long run, that can be really beneficial. Because if it's something that you guys have to do over and over again, like say organizing orientation, right? If you put that thought, that energy into it, your orientations can be consistent. Your instructor onboarding could be consistent. In other roles, I've had instances where instructors would have a completely different onboarding than I did. And they knew things that I didn't, and vice versa. So that can be really confusing. And as an employee, that can be really frustrating, and it can be very confusing, because if you don't know something in your role, or you're not living up to an expectation that maybe you didn't realize, that on the admin is more effort, right? Because then they have to come back, figure out what the issue is, work with you on it, and then go continue whatever stuff they're doing. So it's really important to have consistency.
I agree. Yes.
Okay, we've talked about a lot of tools today. Is there anything else, Jamie, that you want to add, or any comment or thought about tools for admin?
I think the only thing I would leave with saying is, if there is a particular tool that any administrator who's listening to this podcast, if there's any tool that you really love and believe in and you want to share it, then let's share it on the listserv. Share with each other your favorite administrative tools, because that is the best way to improve upon your practice, is learning from each other. So I would love to hear yours. I would love to hear what you use.
Yes, absolutely. Please, guys, send us your stuff. Maybe we'll have a follow-up episode with even more tools for admin that could really be beneficial. We really learn best from each other, and just being collaborative. Okay, so thank you, Jamie. This was great.
Yes, thank you, Nadia. Have a great one.
You too.